Okay, so many of you have been asking me to react to this video, which is currently going around YouTube, titled The Worst Lore in Modern Gaming. And it's talking about Rainbow Six Siege lore. Now, since a lot of my content is based on Rainbow Six Siege lore, I understand why a lot of you would like to see my opinion. And so here's my reaction. I cut off a big chunk of the first part of this video, since a lot of it is sort of just recapping old Siege, which if you watch me, you already know. And I kind of dive into the criticism of the stadium, which I agree with. But after that is when I start to disagree a lot with this video, because I think a lot is just left out, a lot is purposely omitted and drawn up as filler, which I highly don't agree with. And a video which is meant to be presented as a criticism of the lore completely misses or ignore aspects which is meant to go against your argument. Now, this was made by a channel called Wolfe. No hate to them, this is purely my reaction to their video. I recommend you go check them out, show their channel some support. This is their opinion at the end of the day and they're allowed to have it. However, I am just pointing out the issues and inconsistencies with said argument. So yeah, all credit to Wolfe for his original video, and here is my reaction.
Still be scattered across the world, their organization in the lore was considered dissolved. And with their story over, this is where the lore would go into a renaissance. A bad renaissance. It was said that having neutralized the White Masks, Aurelia moved on to be promoted to Secretary of State. And with this came a huge transfer of leadership as she handed over Rainbow to her colleague Harry. Now, if there's any way I can describe Harry, it's that he represented the new direction of Siege. And by that I mean, he was responsible for everything that went horribly wrong. The first thing he did was completely turn the program on its head by creating a concept for a massive sports arena, a location where the program would now mostly...
Going into the stadium era of criticism, I'll probably agree with a lot of the things he's going to say, by the way, because I also did not like the stadium.
Take place. Inside of this arena, the operators were now treated like celebrities, as the arena had been filled with thousands of fans. This was not just an arena for training, but was apparently also meant to entertain the masses, which is an interesting combination for such a confidential society.
It was also meant to also be like a
society
showing off Rainbow to the world, sort of like how, you know, going into a bit of like Thatcher's lore here, he was actually meant to be part of Operation Nimrod, which was a real event which happened in real life with the Iranian embassy siege in England. And Margaret Thatcher used that as an excuse to show off the SAS to the world. So, you know, the whole mindset was like, this is Harry's way of showing Rainbow off to the world. But it also got a bit skewed by in real life esports. So the universe team sort of tried to play into esports of Rainbow Six Siege. And I agree with everything being said here. I thought, personally, the stadium was like the pit. This was like the bottom of Rainbow Six lore, and I 100% agree with that. I hated the stadium. I would have been fine with all of this if there wasn't an audience. The audience is what ruined all of this. Harry's scheme of having these operators compete against each other as training, you might have not liked it, but it's a bit understandable. But having an audience is what really ruined this for me. And, you know, I'll probably agree with a lot of stuff being said here.
The operators were tasked with living in and fighting against each other in the arena, where they used BB guns and sim suits to play for points on a scoreboard, with a commentator included to hype up the fans.
Operators, this is match point. Only one defender remaining. 3 attackers remaining.
They were also interviewed and had talking heads like The Office, and the shift in tone had taken a complete 180.
Gustave Kateb, GIGN, National Gendarmerie Intervention Group.
G'day. Do I look at you or the camera?
Mike Baker, Special Air Service.
Seamus Calden, Sanitation.
So why would Rainbow, a covert organization that uses cutting-edge technology and secret national techniques, do this? Why would they go from focusing on a realistic threat to playing Airsoft Olympics? There is not a good explanation. It was bad writing done to cash in on esports.
Yeah, it was.
Here is the
100%.
reasoning for the dramatic shift according to the lore. Harry had moved Rainbow to this stadium, one, so that Rainbow could train for a wider range of real-world scenarios, you know, by making them train in a paintball stadium, and 2, unite them as a team by also having them live together in it, and basically always work together in teams. This story direction doesn't work. And
I think that works. Personally, I think that works. I think those 2 points are fine. Again, I just don't like the fact that they were shown off to the world and the fact that there was an audience and it was played up like esports. Literally, if you just had that empty... Because the stadium is an old Commonwealth stadium in Greece, which was renovated for rainbow training. I think that's perfectly fine, personally. I think that has cool story aspects, and I think having this unified training base makes a lot of sense. It's the fact that they had a crowd. I think for team building and for, like, you know, working together and training, I think that was good. I think that's a good aspect of the story. But again, it's the crowd which just really shifted it from being a serious training exercise to a fun esports training exercise. That's what really changed the theme. Like, the whole stadium story arc could have been more serious than it was, and you know, that definitely ruined it. I think so.
His plan fails horribly on both of these goals, and he dies. But that's not really Harry's fault as much as it is the writers.
Okay, that's a bit of a, you know, a jump. There's a lot to be said in between that.
Think of Harry as like a scapegoat for the direction that Ubisoft wanted to move Rainbow towards. He's basically like a self-insert for the writers trying to put themselves inside the story so they can directly change what Siege is about. So what are the real developers' reasons for doing this? According to narrative director Alex Lima, the decision to phase out Siege's counter-scarist narrative was so that they could pursue a more comprehensive and scalable story. Apparently, making the game's lore revolve around Call of Duty Olympics achieves this. When it comes to making the story more comprehensive, I don't know about you, but soldiers fighting against real-world threats is a lot easier to grasp than soldiers competing in stadiums for points with live spectators.
I agree.
The whole thing feels impractical, and like the writers don't know which world this story takes place in. Why are there people watching this? Aren't all these operations...
Can I just say, to this day, I still don't know who the audience are. I've tried so much research. I, you know, wondered, oh, I'm like, oh, are these like Rainbow staff or something like that? Is this like an internal thing? I don't know. As far as I'm aware, this is the public. And, you know, I've said it 1,000 times. I don't like that.
Using highly confidential technology? Don't they have identities to protect? Isn't this a bit of a risk? Alright everybody, I'm glad all of our best agents and 50,000 people could be here. This is gonna be a fun one. I packed some extra orange slices. Okay. The lore might be a little bit out there, but at least it accomplished its goal of being scalable. Rainbow is clearly just laying down the foundation for a story that will be built on for the rest of the game's lifespan. They wouldn't just go out with such a dramatic system if it wasn't scalable like they wanted it to be. As it turns out, it was not scalable, because just recently the writers killed off its mascot. So no more Wipeout, everybody. Sorry. How did this happen? How did we lose the Steve Jobs of gaming? Well, I'm happy to say it's a hilariously convoluted series of events. I'm talking Marvel's Civil War levels of buildup, because the guy who did this is exactly like Baron Zemo. After starting their new program, Harry decided to hire Nighthaven, a similar organization to Rainbow, except for the fact that it uses more ruthless and risky tactics. Nighthaven and Rainbow actually have a lot of inherent conflicting worldviews. They do not like each other, and they do not do things the same. It's basically a ripoff of Talon from Overwatch. During their first tournament, because Rainbow does annual tournaments now, Ash, the leader of Rainbow, and Callie, the leader of Nighthaven, get put...
I guess saying Rainbow and Nighthaven conflict with each other, and it's a bit of a broad term. The relationship's a lot deeper than that.
On the same team by Harry, because he knows that they don't like each other, so this should help. What a great idea, Harry. I hope this doesn't cause a butterfly effect that ironically leads to your own end. During a particularly critical round, Callie decides to use Ash and Dokkaebi as bait to secure the W. She also skids a shot through Ash's face, which is kind of concerning because why isn't Ash wearing a helmet if the supposed BB bullets can do this? What if someone accidentally hits a headshot on her? That seems like an incredible health and safety risk. After that kerfuffle, Ash is
I mean, Cav got shot in the head in one of them, and she got like a massive bruise with like dust on it.
Upset because of what Callie did, and she's brooding about it in the bathroom when she hears Callie lecturing the other operators about how in this line of work, you can't be worried about safety. And sometimes, you gotta bend the rules to secure the win. And Ash gets so mad that she storms into the other room and starts telling Callie off. She tells her that she doesn't know how they do it in Nighthaven, but here at Rainbow, you can't use people as bait. Callie tells her that it's just a game, which it is, and Ash punches her. The room then proceeded to break out into chaos as the operators split up into two sides of the room, literally picking sides. And by the next cinematic, Nighthaven decides to leave Rainbow, an incredibly short run. It's almost like they were only here so the Rainbow writers could use them to cook up conflict.
Yes, that is sort of true. There's also a lot of story in between that. Nighthaven actually revealed that the reason why they joined Rainbow in the first place was to actually basically recruit soldiers for their own. Nighthaven's a private military company, and they want to be the best, the strongest in the world. They want to have the best, most elite soldiers. So when they got the offer to Rainbow, Callie had a bit of a plan going. And so basically her infiltration in Rainbow was, yes, they're still good people, but they're sort of going to give these operators some offers based on their personalities and based on their issues, for example. Finca, for example, wanted to kind of push CB around threat detection and research to a new level. Nighthaven allowed her to do that, so she left Rainbow to join Nighthaven. There's a lot of stuff in between which they're sort of missing out. Yeah, they're getting the main story parts, but I feel like when you base it down to very key points, you are missing a lot of depth and building, which does happen in the background, which, in fairness, I think you need to have a critical aspect on it. But the key points are also true.
So as you can see, the game's writers are really going heavy on the internal beef angle. They're basically just stirring up drama out of nowhere. Even Ella and Zofia, who for a long time coexisted as sisters, started to get more hostile towards each other, with the arena being fuel for their rivalry. They basically get retconned into always having hated each other, and Ella leaves Zofia behind to join Nighthaven along with a bunch of other operators.
It's not retcon, that's always been in their story. There was literally a thing when they first came out that you would get extra points for killing Ella and Zofia as the other one. Ella and Zofia's history has always been that Zofia's always been the more popular child from their father. They grew up in military school, their father is high up in the military. Zofia was always the favored daughter. Ella was always the rebellious one who was left in the shadow. That's not a retcon, that's been their story since the start. They've always had conflict through Rainbow, and the fact that Nighthaven gave her a chance to separate from that was a big part in that story. So there was no retcon there. That's been their story since the start. Ella and Zofia's, differences have been there since the very beginning of their stories in their bio.
Then Callie lectures Ella about how she made the right choice. Great job, Harry. This arena has really done its job of bringing everybody together.
Again, there's a massive point here being missed, though, is the fact that Nighthaven have had a secret intention this whole time. It was Harry's mistake letting Nighthaven on the team. He let Nighthaven on because he was worried that maybe they could be used against Rainbow or used by like a opposing threat and hire Nighthaven. Now, we know now that's probably something Nighthaven would never do. Yes, they play off the books. Yes, they're a bit shady, but they're not bad people. But that's why Harry brought Nighthaven on board. He used the money seized from the White Masks to recruit Nighthaven. Now, with Nighthaven on board, Callie had her secret plan to basically recruit operators from Rainbow. So yes, it was a failure of Harry, but that was the intention. That was Callie's, Harry basically got played. That's what I'm trying to say. That was the story aspect from the start. I disagree with the stadium. I completely agree about that stuff, but you're missing a lot of very key points, and it's not as, sort of basic as it's being explained.
You have really done some good team building. A true peacemaker. This sort of Civil War narrative has actually been done in quite a few other games before. Overwatch has always had a lot of this in its lore with the heroes not getting along. Apex Legends had some beef, and I think Valorant too, maybe. You can tell that they also moved the operators into the stadium so that they could have a good environment for these arguments. Because if they were still mostly focused on actually stopping criminals, there wouldn't be any time for these petty differences. But now, because they're inside a safe environment, everyone can have fights without compromising any missions, which makes the Olympics direction even more ridiculous. But things get much worse. The introduction for Azami, a new operator, follows these events. And in her animated short, we get the lore that her boss, and I guess dear friend, was murked in front of her eyes. And she visits her friend Habana, who is still on Rainbow's side by this point, to show her that the bullets used were labeled Nighthaven property. So rather than jump to conclusions, the Rainbow folks track down the mercenaries who killed Azami's boss to see if they can figure out who ordered them. But it turns out the mercenaries were bait, and a helicopter starts shooting at all the Rainbow operators. And they're all like, oh man, I'm pretty sure this is the work of Nighthaven. We haven't gotten any more evidence since that bullet, but if this is Nighthaven, we're mad, so it might as well be Nighthaven. And so they decide to
Well, that's the point, though. They don't know it's Nighthaven, hence the mission.
fully jump to conclusions by deciding to infiltrate Nighthaven's HQ. But when Nock does a swap...
So I need to rewind this bit again, because I'm a bit confused.
Oh man, I'm pretty sure this is the work of Nighthaven. We haven't gotten any more evidence since that bullet, but if this is Nighthaven, we're mad, so it might as well be Nighthaven. And so they decide to fully jump to conclusions by deciding to infiltrate Nighthaven's HQ.
No, but that was the whole point, was to find more evidence that it was Nighthaven. I think they've gotten a bit confused with this, because them infiltrating Nighthaven wasn't like, all right, we're going to infiltrate Nighthaven and we're going to take them all out. Them infiltrating Nighthaven was, we need more evidence that Nighthaven done this. So the critique of, they're critiquing something which story was actually doing, if that makes sense. You're saying that they didn't have enough evidence and they just jumped to conclusions, but what was happening was them gathering evidence. I think you didn't really understand the story at that point.
But when Nock does a sloppy job escaping, Nighthaven finds out she was poking around their base and tracks her down. Nock was tracked down. The invisible stealth operator, the one whose only ability in Siege is being invisible on cameras, was caught on camera and then tracked down by bees. And so Grim from Nighthaven pays a visit to her and threatens.
You're also missing the point. You're also missing the part where Nook's identity is super secret in NATO, and Grim went on a very long track against different people, eventually finding himself with an employee of NATO, if I'm not wrong, and basically held him at knife point and threatened his family if he does not spill secrets. Again, you're missing a lot of major story points here. It isn't, oh, we think it's Nook, boom, we found Nook. It's also the fact that Nighthaven and Grim have now also threatened NATO. Did NATO know that? We don't know. There's a lot of bits you're missing out here. If you explain a story and miss out a bunch of key parts, of course it's going to sound a lot more simpler than it actually is.
Then Rainbow decides to go to Nighthaven again, but this time just to tell them to stay out of their business and give Solus a cool moment to shine. And then they realize both of their gear has been stolen this entire time because someone else has apparently been messing with both.
Well, the reason why Rainbow went to Nighthaven is because they've realized that there is now a bigger threat, potentially on the scale of the White Mask, and they don't want a private military company now causing basically a war around the world with an unknown threat. That's the reason. They say this in the thing, is that they don't want Nighthaven starting a war over something like this. Leave it to Rainbow, leave it to NATO to do it. This is, something that they're going to take control of now. That was what the point of that mission was. It was to give Solus a cool mission, but again, you're completely omitting the main part of each of these stories.
Both teams. So all of their conflict was pointless. This is horrible. But literally none of it matters because it turns out it was all a guy named Deimos. He had orchestrated everything all along. This guy then visits Harry, tries and fails to take out Rainbow operatives in front of him, and then tells Harry that old Rainbow was better and shoots him. Deimos is basically the Siege's community personified.
And you
Turned him into the fucking escapades. It's not wrong.
Everybody then tracks Deimos down and captures him. So that is the lore with a lot of filler cut out, because as you can see, there's already just...
See, I think this is a really big issue with this video. I thought at the start there was a lot well done, but then you've just brushed over 5 years of content very seamlessly in 5 minutes. Missed out a lot of key parts, which you're calling filler, which has diminished a lot of the story building which set up each bit. If you take any story and you only talk about the key points with none of the build-up and the reasoning behind it, then you can diminish a lot of stories to basically, slop, which you're welcome to think it is, but at least include the parts that set stuff up. I feel there's too much omitted from this video to call it an effective criticism, in my opinion.
So much nonsense in it. They were clearly just making pointless storylines to draw out the lore, so they wouldn't have to worry about actually doing anything that had a big impact on the game. But the worst part is how the lore is not compatible with the game itself. First of all, if Nighthaven and Rainbow never really got along, how come they trained together in-game? You could explain this by saying that the game takes place at a time when the two forces were briefly in harmony before or after their conflict. But that doesn't explain Deimos being a playable character.
They're just playable. Gameplay has never affected lore. That's also like having the criticism of how can operators pull a reinforcement out their ass? How do operators bleed when it's meant to be a training sim? We can always go down these little nitpicks of does lore equal gameplay? And it's just stuff that you're meant to overlook. Again, if lore started to properly affect gameplay like that, then people would start to complain that the lore is intruding too much into gameplay. It's a balance you're going to have to get with every single game. There's a reason why every operator is the same height, for balancing reasons. We like to joke about how small Mozzie is, but in game, he's the same height as some of the tallest operators, such as Kaid and Sledge. That is for balancing. At the end of the day, we have to accept that this is a competitive PvP game. The lore team can only have so much influence on, the gameplay. That's just how it's going to be with every FPS shooter.
We haven't got a lot of information about Deimos' plan. All that we know is that he thinks Rainbow is too soft and wants to kill all the operators. But now he plays alongside them in their games, whether it's in the Wipeout Stadium or anywhere else. He trains with his worst enemies. In his introduction video, the dev...
Again, that's just another thing. It's just for the gameplay reasons. It's just to sell a PvP game at the end of the day. You just overlook the fact that you're playing alongside him. and his story's still developing. He's only just been added this season, so I think saying a lot about you don't know what Deimos is doing is a bit of like, I mean, you're not wrong, but we also are still unraveling it. We only got a comic book like 2 days ago, which gave us a bit more depth into his background. And, you know, I don't know. I feel like the whole Deimos background bit's a bit of you know, we don't know enough yet to talk about that.
As we're like, yes, Deimos hates Rainbow, but he's not really a part of the team, guys. He's just agreeing to practice with them forever. Mocks Rainbow for being basically Airsoft. Becomes part of the Airsoft team. Oh, the irony. As you can see, the developers' decision to change Siege's narrative led to more problems than it solved. The lore was poorly strategized, as it led to the developers having trouble explaining why it doesn't line up with gameplay, and the pacing itself was also super disjointed, and it feels like it took years for anything to happen. The stadium basically acted as an environment for these silly stories to play out, and then couldn't be scaled anymore and was scrapped. Had Rainbow continued in its original direction, not only would it have been more coherent, but the stakes would be higher and fans would be more engaged. There are plenty of directions you could go with real-world antagonists that would have actually lifted.
I mean, I feel like at any, you know, I agree with the stadium criticism. I think the stadium was terrible, and I think Deimos is a course correction, and the death of Harry is a course correction of those poor story decisions. But the original narrative was, it was just another enemy. You know, I think the White Masks, I have theories that the White Masks are still involved. I think the White Masks will probably still appear in the story. But they were bound to be defeated. If the story was just going to be for 9 years that Rainbow were fighting the White Masks, it could have worked, but we were bound to get a more narrative-driven thing like this eventually. You're bound to get a main villain, whether you like it or not, whether you may find Deimos a bit, you know, I guess comic book-like, or we don't really have we don't know a lot about him yet. Of course, we know he's an ex-Rainbow operative, and they're tying in the older games with that, which is something I think a lot of people wanted from the lore, was to recognize the older games, since Gerald Morris was part of the original Rainbow Six roster. So, you know, we're still learning that stuff, and I will take every criticism for the stadium, because I agree. I think the stadium was awful, but I think after that, the story aspects have just been completely glazed over in this video, and only the key points have. Because, like I said, it's easy to only focus on key points, and just, you know, if you're going to call everything in between it filler, which I will say this game, a lot of the lore doesn't have filler in this at all. I think all the lore in this game has its reason, and it supports the next piece of lore. So calling it filler and just brushing over it in a video where you're meant to be critiquing it is pretty weak in my opinion.
Gameplay up too. A new group of scarers that target tech could make levels where you can't use anything electric. And more levels like Article 5 would challenge players in new and interesting ways.
I agree, I'd love more PvP content, but you've also got all the resources which already go into having this highly functional multiplayer game that, you know, it gets to a point that, you know, no one queued Article 5. I loved Article 5, don't get me wrong, but you'd wait 20 minutes for a queue and no one would be playing it. We can sit on nostalgia and we can talk about how great this stuff is, and I 100% agree with you, and I'd love all this fully expanded in its own standalone game. But to say that we should have just kept getting more PvP things like this when the average player wasn't involved in it. And like you said at the beginning of the video, the average player doesn't really know or care about the story. So what was the point in continuing doing stuff like this anyway? Article 5 was always meant to be the end. Ubisoft never planned to make this a story game. Those were just the story aspects. The PvP was always meant to be the focus. So I think we just have to move on from the fact that Article 5 was a one and done thing for this game. I want more Rainbow Six titles. I want the narrative to be you know, put into its own story, have some more single player aspects, but it's not going to happen in Siege.
The writers could also have those same dramatic emotions they wanted to stir up with Nighthaven, but in a much more engaging way to audiences. Just make it so Ash is brooding because the new opposition is causing her to doubt Rainbow's capabilities. Something like that would not only be more interesting, but it would also tie in with the game, raising the stakes around the organization instead of making it a recreational Nerf club. Lore and story are a critical part of a community's engagement with a game, and fans have been begging to return to Siege's more serious narrative ever since once it was abandoned. The problem is, going back to a more serious threat would mean that Ubisoft would have to spend resources on making more single-player gameplay. We don't want to do that, dude. That would take money. We're more interested in appealing to esports and cutting costs by removing all traces of PvE gameplay while we're at it. Although ask any esports player what they think of Stadium, and they'll probably tell you it's their least favorite map. It's not even in the ranked map pool. I really don't have any high expectations.
I mean, Stadium's only in the game because that was for an event, and one of the maps got delayed. So they were like, yo, we'll give you Stadium as a playable map from that one event just to tide you over for a season. So Stadium wasn't... Whatever, it was a one-off comment. I'm looking too much into it.
For this game's story, because clearly the narrative department of Siege has no idea what they're doing. Of course, in a game like Rainbow, lore is not the final say in a game's success at all. This game is doing very well, and it clearly didn't need its half-baked world building to do so. But judging it strictly from a writing perspective, this game's lore and overall story is a failure. It's not well written or interesting, and worst of all, it doesn't stay true to the game itself. I have no idea where the story is going to go from here. I'm predicting Deimos will escape from Rainbow and just wreak havoc for 3 years while still being a playable character in game. They're gonna probably chase him around for 2 years before making him take over Nighthaven or something. If you like this video, make sure to plant the diffuser on the
alright. I mean, it wasn't a bad video. I just feel like the first quarter was good. Everything about the original vision, like the Article 5 and everything, it was right. And I agree with every critique of the Stadium. I 100% agree with that. But I feel like after that, everything was just missed. The whole, every story bit in between was just overlooked. The whole point in Deimos is course correction, as well as incorporating older Rainbow Six titles into the story. There is a change. Obviously, you do see a change from the original to then all the Stadium and everything happening right now. But you're also bound to get that on a game which is 9 years old and doesn't have a primary way of telling stories. The story in this game is told through trailers, battle passes, and comic books. There's not a easy way to convey a story like this. I agree we should have other Rainbow Six games, but as it currently stands, it's going to be Siege. It's in the top 10 most played games in the world. You know what I mean? People really underestimate how big this game is. So, of course, they're going to put it in this game. Their last venture, Rainbow Six Extraction, didn't do insane, so I think they're definitely going to be scared to release more games. But we'll see how that goes. Of course, Extraction had its own issues. People didn't like the whole alien thing. People did. But a more grounded Rainbow Six title, I think we're definitely overdue for. But I think the story, I just think, no disrespect to the creator, but I think if we're going to make a video about the worst lore in gaming, we should at least convey the story the way it's being conveyed, rather than omitting a lot of information. But maybe that's just me. But yeah, be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Check out the original poster Lufa. And yeah, I'm open to a discussion in the comments. Sure, let me know your thoughts. Have an incredible rest of your day. I shall catch you all later. Peace.